He called the gospel writers a band of dupes and imposters. He called St. Paul the first corrupter of the doctrines of Jesus. So, my question is, why do you look at Thomas Jefferson and say his views represent the great Christian tradition, and Thomas Paine yet is this terrible Enlightenment anti-religious person when their views were exactly alike?
Well, there are two parts to this. I mean, certainly, I do think there were important differences between Jefferson and Paine. Paine's deism was more deeply entrenched, the absentee God who put the world into motion and then went on long-term vacation. Jefferson had a much higher view of the moral teachings of Jesus. He thought Jesus to be, in a way, the perfect man. Not God, not a miracle worker, but he thought that Jesus' spiritual insights were very deep. Now, when Christians today read the words of Jesus, let's say the woman taken in adultery, for example, and so on, the question is, should those precepts, which are as philosophically insightful as anything other major philosophers have laid forward, should those precepts be somehow, again, excluded from the legitimate debate of American politics? That's not what we're debating. The impact of Christianity, in this case Jesus, what would Jesus do, on American politics. So, for example, Jesus creates a very high view of sin. In other words, if you even contemplated the sin, you've committed it. And yet, he's very gentle with the woman in adultery or the woman who had 5 husbands. So on the one hand, he's tough on the sin, but you might say gentle on the sinner. Now, let's just say there's a Christian outlook on politics adapted from Jesus that applies that idea to American politics. I'm saying, is that any less than an application of, let's say, some principle from Rousseau or Kant or Heidegger? Those are secular philosophers. Nobody would even argue if somebody said, let's discuss the ethical principles of Kant in, let's say, a public school. Nobody would object if a school teacher was handing out the metaphysics of morals or the social contract. This wouldn't even be an issue. So my point is, why does suddenly this Jesus, whose impact again was much greater than the others, somehow suddenly qualify as the bad guy who should be left out? Is this actually what the founders were scared about? Is this what they were trying to protect against? Or do we have a tendentious reading of what they were trying to achieve? They were trying to prevent religious war. They were haunted by the memories of what had happened between the British and the French, the Inquisition, the persecutions. That's not an issue here. What's at issue here is that those fears are being harnessed politically today against what would seem to be a perfectly legitimate application of very deep ethical principles to our political situation. So that's the difference between Jefferson, who I think would consider that application completely legitimate, and Paine, on the other hand, who probably would not.